Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. We are here to learn some new stuff today. Anybody know the theme of our year this year? No. No. It's a tough times never last, but tough realtors do. We're tough realtors, right? Amen. Would you guys please join me for the flag salute? Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Yes. Thank you. So I got some small housekeeping things I'd like to bring up. Remember, if you have a question to ask, we have 3 microphones out there. Paris Davis. Paris, raise your hand. There it is there. Carrie Cullifer, please raise your hand. There she is. And AJ Bowie in the back. Please be sure you get their attention so that we can talk. We have a Zoom going on at the same time, and they need to hear maybe what you have to say. So this morning we got Gov Hutchinson. He's the Assistant General Counsel for the California Association of REALTORS. Gov has been with C.A.R since 1985 and manages C.A.R's member legal services program in Los Angeles. Gov advises realtors through the hotline on all aspects of real estate law. He trains and supervises other hotline attorneys. Gov received his bachelor's degree in history from Princeton University and his Juris Doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania. So without further ado this morning, Gov Hutchinson.
Hello. All right. Well, you know how I always come here every year in the fall? This is not that. I'm coming back in a month or so for the normal legal updates. This is not that. This is one topic today, but it's the big topic of the year. It's probably the big topic of the last 20 years, 30 years. I've been here 39 years, and this is the biggest change, I think, for realtors that you've ever had to deal with in my 39 years. So it's a big deal. So that's all I'm talking about today. And I know there's a lot of you there. Plenty of time for questions because I know you're going to have a lot of questions. But let me just jump into it. We're talking about the new rules on buyer agency, which are really a big deal. And the legal hotline, the thing I'm in charge of, last 2 weeks have been the busiest 2 weeks in like 40 years. Hundreds of, every day, so many of you are calling, all relatively about the same stuff. So it's now been about 2 weeks into it. So maybe it's a little bit better, but I'm here to talk about and answer all your questions about the new rules regarding buyer agency. Now, the background of this, as you know, there were these lawsuits, big lawsuits, nationwide lawsuits. Everybody got sued. NAR got sued, C.A.R got sued. Every MLS in the country got sued. A lot of local associations got sued. All the big brokerage companies you've ever heard of got sued. Everybody got sued. Who sued them? Sellers. Everyone who sold a house in the last 5 years. Why were they suing? They want a refund. What do you mean you want a refund? Yeah, you sold my house 3 years ago. I want a refund of the commission. They don't want the whole thing back. They just want the part they sent to the buyer's agent. Why on earth do they think they're entitled to a refund? Because the commission was too high. Well, why did they think it was too high? Because it was paid pursuant to this structure that violated the antitrust laws, the national antitrust laws. In other words, the whole system that we have for paying commissions to buyers agents, that was the problem. And that whole system resulted in buyer agent commissions being higher than they should be. And we could argue all day about that, but there's no point in arguing about it because the lawsuits are over. Everybody settled. And I was hoping that Warren Buffett wasn't going to settle. I was hoping Berkshire Hathaway was going to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court because he's actually got billions of dollars to pay the judgment. But even he settled. Everybody settled, which means the cases are over. The good news for you is, all of you in this room, that means none of you can get sued as long as you follow the new rules. That's good. You're not going to get sued. The bad news, of course, is part of this big settlement was everybody, all of you, me, everyone in the entire country is agreeing to do two things. And if we don't do these two things, then you can get sued. The two things are, number one, I'm going to give you all the details in a second. If you're going to work with a buyer, you need a written contract. That's big change number one. You can't work with a buyer without a contract. Big change number two, which is even bigger, is how buyer's agents get paid. The old way, the traditional way, your whole life, my whole life has been, you got paid, all you had to do was look on the MLS and there was a number there. Listing agent is offering a number. That was what you got paid. There was no negotiation. There was no contract that had to get signed. The number on the MLS, that was what you got paid. End of story. That's over. So these two things are big changes, and let me talk about both of them. The first one is you need a contract before you can work with a buyer. So the first question is, what does it mean, work with a buyer? What if I just meet somebody, some potential buyer client? I start talking to them about real estate. Do I need a contract? Not yet. What if I want to just send them information like these are recent listings in the neighborhood? These are recent sales. Then you're giving them general information. Do I need a contract for that? No. But once you start focusing on a particular property, like they want to see it, or they want to do a virtual tour, or they want you to do an analysis of this particular property, once you start focusing on a particular property that they might be interested in, that's when you need the contract. Now, of course, if I were you, I would try to do it as soon as you can. Because imagine if you meet this person, send them all this great information. They say, thanks for the information. I'm going to go to my friend Joe, who's going to help me write an offer. So obviously, it's in your interest as soon as possible to get your buyer to sign a contract, because then they're committed to you. So, but the actual deadline, you're going to get in trouble if you go, focus in on a particular property, do a market analysis, or showing them is the real thing. You can't show them a property without the contract. Okay. So question that comes up right away is this residential only? Or what if I represent commercial buyers? What if I represent vacant land buyers? What if I represent industrial buyers? What if I represent tenants? Do I need a contract to represent those people? And the answer is not yet. But January 1st, California is going to have a new law unrelated to the settlement, was in play before the settlement, that's going to extend this to commercial land, industrial. So the only exception is going to be if you're working with a tenant and all they want to do is find something to rent for a year or less, you won't need a contract. But if the tenant wants to find something more than a year, or it's a sale, any type of sale, you need to have the contract. So today, until January 1st, it's only mandatory for residential sales. Starting January 1st, it's beyond that. Okay, so naturally, since you need a written contract, we have a written contract. What a great idea. And BRBC, there's a form out there. But there's actually two forms. I know you're already getting a headache. Okay, I know, I get it. So there's one form that you're probably going to use called the BRBC, Buyer Representation Broker Compensation Agreement. That's the one I'm going to talk about. But we also have a light version of the form. Coke and Coke Light. We have Buyer Broker Contract and Buyer Broker Contract Light. But I'll talk about that other one in a little bit later. So this basic form, you're going to have to get signed to work with a buyer. I mean, I know this is a huge change. Your whole life, you've represented sellers. You'd never work with a seller without a contract. Nobody does a verbal listing. But your whole life, when you've worked with buyers, you've made it informal. You sort of meet someone, you hit it off, you start working with them, you write an offer, but there was never anything formal in writing. Well, that's the big change. You have to do that. You have to get this formal contract. What if I work with a buyer without one, you could get in trouble. And here's the worst news. I hate to tell you this, but you're not surprised, and I'm not surprised. There are already people out there trying to catch you. I already have been talked to a lot of realtors. They get emails like this. Hey, my name's John Smith, and I'm really interested in seeing some properties. So please meet with me. I want to see some properties, and I'm not going to sign a buyer broker contract. They say that in the email, hoping you'll say, okay, and then they'll get you in trouble. That's already happening. That is already happening. So there are people out to get you already. So you can't say, well, no, I'm not going to do this. What's the problem? Who's going to find out if I'm, no one in this room would do this, but who's going to find out if I'm working with someone without a contract? Well, there are people trying to catch you, trying to get you in trouble because they want to sue you or at least turn you in. Anyway, so we got the concept. You need the contract. This contract is pretty straightforward. We have a whole class on this. It takes about an hour online. Look at it. You can look at it over and over and over again. It goes through the whole form line by line. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you the highlights. Highlights. So when you pull out this form for your buyer, there's only 5 things you have to figure out. And that's it. And they're all on the first page. Number 1, how long is this contract going to last? Did you maximum? Can I renew it? You can keep renewing it for 3 months at a time if you want, but you have to start with 3 months. Unless your buyer is a corporation, an LLC, or a partnership. If that's your buyer, it can be as long as you want. Sign them up for 50 years, no problem. But if your buyer is a person or a trust, 3 months maximum. All right, so that's the first thing you're going to decide is how long is this? And of course, you can have a protection period too. Your contract can say, just like a listing, okay, you're working with me for 3 months, then it ends, 3 months ends. Well, if you've shown them anything during those 3 months, they can't just wait for the contract to expire and then, okay, thanks for your help on the 3 months and 1 day, I'm going to go buy it without you. No, you just like on a listing, you're going to give them a list of all the properties you introduced to them, and then you're protected for the next, how long? You have a continuation period. It could be up to 3 months. Okay. All right. So the first decision is how long is it going to last? The second decision you're going to have, and this is a little confusing, is it going to be exclusive or non-exclusive? It's confusing because the C.A.R. listing contract is exclusive. When someone lists with you under the C.A.R. form, you're the only agent they're working with. It's an exclusive contract. This buyer broker contract, the buyer and you have a choice. It can be exclusive or non-exclusive. Exclusive is what you want. Exclusive is the buyer saying, you're my only agent. I'm your only buyer. You're not necessarily my only buyer, but you're my only agent. If I buy anything, you're my agent, period. Non-exclusive means they're saying you're only my agent if you find me the house that I buy. So theoretically, a buyer could hire more than one agent, each one non-exclusive. I mean, at the beginning, buyers are going to be confused by this. You know the standard question you always have when you meet someone, prospective client, are you working with someone? You know what your new question is going to be? Have you signed a contract with someone? And they're going to say, yeah, I think so, maybe. I'm not sure. But maybe they actually say, yeah, I work with someone and I signed a contract. I said, was it exclusive or non-exclusive? They're going to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Then you're going to say, you need to show me the contract you signed with the other agent. I think I lost it. I mean, there'll be problems at the beginning, but you'll figure it out. Hopefully the person says, no, I have not signed a contract with someone else. If they say they have signed a contract with someone else, that means you need to see it, because if it's exclusive, you're going to back off. You're going to say, okay, you've already got an agent. Call me when that one's over. If it's non-exclusive, you could, if you wanted to, sign up with a non-exclusive yourself. You could if you want to. So first decision, how long? Second decision, exclusive or non-exclusive. Third decision, you have to specify what type of property are they hiring you to buy? The form itself, it defaults to single family. So if you don't check any boxes, buyer's hiring you to buy a single family home. Then what if they end up buying a duplex? You're not their agent because the contract said single family. So when you're filling out this form with the buyer, you probably want to check the box. If there's any possibility they're going to buy something else, check the box, multifamily. Or maybe they may end up buying something commercial or land. Check those boxes too. Check the boxes, all of the boxes that are relevant that they might buy. Check them all. I mean, because you have to designate the buyer, you have to specifically be authorized. It can be a lot of, it can be everything. But if you don't check any boxes, they're just hiring you to buy single family. All right. So how long, exclusive or non-exclusive, type of property. And the fourth thing you always have to put down is the location. You have to say what area. If you leave it blank, you have nothing. So you have to put, I don't know, Kern County, city of Bakersfield. In other words, they're hiring you. Maybe they're hiring you to buy it all over the place. You could put Kern County, LA County, Ventura County, San Diego, you know what I mean? But you have to fill that in. Don't put the entire world. No, don't do that. And don't even put the entire state of California, because you're not really, I mean, you're not really probably expert in the entire area. This is, a buyer could say, you're my Kern County agent. You're my exclusive agent in Kern County, but I got another one in LA County. You know what I mean? They could do it that way. Or you're my agent for single family, but I got someone else looking for commercial. So all these, you have to figure all this out. You know, all these, you could probably figure all this out. It's not too hard to figure out how long, what type of property, what area, and exclusive or non-exclusive. But the last thing you have to figure out is the biggest change in your life. You have to put in compensation. Traditionally, when you've worked with buyers, I know this because I've been working for you for 39 years. I know typically as a buyer's agent, you never really brought up compensation. You never even mentioned it. They didn't bring it up. You didn't bring it up. Sometimes I think they think you're free. This is a great service. You know, this nice lady is helping me look at houses. That's so great. It's wonderful. You know, or they probably know you got paid, but they didn't really worry about it because it was out of their area. So you know, it never came up. It shows up on the closing statement, but it was never really a top of mind issue. That's the big change. Transparency of commissions. That's the big thing that was behind these lawsuits. You have to put down on the contract how much you're going to get paid. Now, you notice I didn't say how much the buyer is going to pay you. Because just because this contract says the buyer owes you X does not mean the buyer is going to have to go to their bank and pull out some money and give it to you. We're going to talk about how you get paid in a second. But you and the buyer have to agree on how much you're getting paid. And you can't put, oh, between 1% and 4%. No. You can't say, whatever the seller's going to pay me, that's how much I'm getting paid. No, you have to have a real number, a percentage or a dollar number or both. I mean, you could say things like, well, you're going to pay me this percentage if it's a 30-day escrow or less, but if it's more than 30 days, you're going to pay me that. You could do that. You could say, if it's 4-bedroom, I'm going to pay you this. If it's 3-bedroom, I'm going to pay you that. I mean, people could, you can make it like that. You can vary it like that, but you can't say it's a range, and you can't say it's whatever the seller's going to pay me. All right. So in other words, the buyer has to agree as to how much you're getting paid, which means for the first time in your life, you're going to actually have to convince a buyer what you're worth, which to me, optimistic me, is that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I don't think buyers have ever appreciated all the things you do for them. I mean, maybe the buyer's going to say, what's the number? Okay, that's a good number. I'm fine. But what if the buyer says, why is that the right number? Why should I pay you that much? Well, what do you do when a seller tells you, why should I pay you that much? I'm sure you have an answer for the seller. Well, now you're going to have an answer for the buyer. You're going to be able to tell the buyer why they should hire you and why is it worth the amount of money. My fantasy, of course, is that once you tell the buyer all the things you're going to do, they're going to say, wow, how much do you want? 8, 9%? I mean, what's the right number? You know what I mean? I mean, why does it have to be a low number? I mean, I like to say 40 years ago when I started, it was a 2-page purchase contract and there were no disclosures. Some of you people my age remember this. Now you have a 17-page contract, dozens of other pages, complicated lend rules, complicated rental rules, and you're still getting the same percentage you got 30, 40 years ago. Maybe you should get paid more than you used to. Anyway, the point is, it's negotiable. You and the buyer have to figure this out. But that's the biggest change. You know what really pushed these lawsuits? The fact that up until now, you worked for the buyer, you got paid because of helping the buyer, but the buyer had no input in what you got paid. The problem, according to these lawsuits, was the seller side determined how much the buyer's agent got paid. And that's true, right? In the old way, how much you get paid? You got paid whatever the listing agent and the seller thought you should get paid. The buyer had no say so. And that was considered to be the big problem. So that's over. Buyer now has input into what you get paid because you and the buyer are going to agree to get the seller to pay me, 3 or 4%. If that happens, you get 1%. You can't get more than the number you agree to. Can I just amend? I put 1%, write an offer, seller agrees to pay 3. I go back to the buyer and say, hey, seller's going to pay 3, so let's amend this up. You can't really do that. That's like a breach of fiduciary duty. I mean, how is that helping your buyer if you increase your compensation more than it was before, you're making it harder for them to buy the house in the first place because now they have less money to play with to reduce their offer or whatever. Anyway, the point is you have to focus on this is the number, this is the maximum, this is the cap. Now you can get less than this if the buyer agrees to pay you, for example, 3%, and the seller says, I'm only going to pay 2.5%. You could, if you want to, say, okay, buyer, I'm a saint. I'm going to reduce the 3 that you already promised to a lesser number. That's how nice I am. You can do that if you want to. Or you can say, well, the seller's only paying 2.5%. I guess you owe me 1/2. Well, I don't have it. Well, then you can't buy the house. I mean, life is tough. Anyway, I'll talk about that more. I'll talk about more of that in a second. But you get the basic idea. The basic idea, you need a number and you have to put that number in the contract, period. And that's a cap. All right. Almost done with this form. I think you understand, obviously, that if the buyer agrees to pay you, for example, I don't know, 2.5%, and then you write the offer and the seller agrees to pay you 2.5%, you don't get 5%, right? You don't get, just because the seller's, I mean, that follows from what I just said. This is all you get. You might get less than this, but this is the max. Okay. I mentioned there's a continuation period. You can say this is a 3-month contract, but if you buy any of the properties I showed you for the whatever period of time after, I'm still your agent. Here's another interesting thing is there's a cancellation paragraph on this contract. Now, on your listing contract, there's no cancellation. Have you noticed that on a listing contract, if somebody lists with you for like 4 months, that's it. 4 months. They can't quit. They can't say after 2 months, I don't like you. They're committed to you for 4 months and you can't quit them. You're committed to them. Listing contracts have no cancellation. This form, not only is it limited to 3 months, but there's a cancellation provision. So if you and the buyer don't get along or whatever, they can cancel you or you can cancel them early. If it's non-exclusive, either one of you can cancel instantly. If it's exclusive, you'd have to give, either one who wanted to cancel have to give a 30-day notice, but unless you both wanted to cancel. But you're still protected, though. I mean, if you sign a contract with the buyer, you show them a couple houses, and then they say, I don't like you, I'm canceling. Well, obviously, if they buy one of those two houses after the cancellation, you're still their agent. You're still protected with the same continuation period. So they can't just use you to find the property and then dump you, cancel you, and say, okay, I don't need you anymore, and then they buy it with some whatever. Okay, so but there is a cancellation period. Couple more things, and then I'm done with this. Is there's a place there's a couple other forms that are mentioned on the first page here that are not mandatory. You know, when you meet a buyer and you start working with them, traditionally, of course, they're going to tell you like what they're looking for. I'm looking for 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, square footage of this, price range. They tell you these things. Obviously, you need to know that. Well, you now have a form if you want to use for that. BIP, buyer information on references and priorities. You don't have to. I mean, it's mentioned in the form. That doesn't mean you have to use it. You can just skip that. And you know what? Even if you do use it, no legal significance. So the buyer says, okay, yeah, it's a good form. They fill out the form and they write down, I'm looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then they end up buying a 4-bedroom. You're still their agent. You still get paid. It's not like that's binding. It's just a suggestion to give you some guidance. But if you decide to use this information and preferences form, which you don't have to use, even if they use it, it's not committing them or you to anything. Okay? Last thing. Box on the first form. The last thing is there's a clause in here that says within 5 days, buyer's going to give you their personal and financial information. What does that even mean? It's sort of like a proof of funds. You know how all these years in the purchase contract, the buyer has to provide some type of proof of funds to the seller within 3 days, or better yet, it's attached to the form. Basically, you're supposed to give the seller something in writing that shows you actually have liquid assets that would enough for the down payment and the closing costs. Because otherwise, why are you going to waste your time with someone who just doesn't have the money to buy it? Seller could say, well, you don't have it, so goodbye. I mean, sellers can go forward if the buyer doesn't have, hoping the buyer is going to like win the lottery during escrow. But the point is, there's always been a requirement that the buyer submits to the seller a proof of funds. Well, now there's the same thing on this form. Think about this for a second. So the buyer agrees on this form because they have to. They agree that you're going to get paid X. So you're probably curious, I wonder if they actually have any money, because we're going to try to get the seller to pay, but maybe it's going to come down to the fact that the buyer actually owes me this money. I'm sort of curious if the buyer actually has any money at all. Otherwise, I may not even want to work with them. So in other words, the buyer is promising, I'm going to give you some type of proof of funds. Very informal. It could be like, here's my bank account, or here's how much I have in my liquid money market fund, or whatever. And they're going to show you that they actually have enough money, not just for the down payment, but also to pay you if they have to. Of course, the buyer at this point would say, I actually don't have that money. I mean, I barely have the down payment. I had to borrow from 12 relatives for the down payment. And I had to rob a bank, so I mean, I barely have the money. So I'm going to tell you right up front, I do not have any other money anywhere that I can bring to escrow to pay you. Well, that's something that's good for you to know. You may say at that point, well, I don't need to want to go forward here. Or you're probably going to say to yourself, well, we're probably going to try to get the seller to pay for it anyway, so I'll go forward anyway. But it does give you the opportunity to say right at that moment, right at the beginning, before you've done anything, and the buyer flat out tells you, I simply have no money. And there's a checkbox they can check. I have no money. I don't have sufficient funds to pay you. You could at that moment say, well, I know we signed this contract, but now that I see you really have no money, I don't want to go forward. You could make that decision if you wanted to. Of course, you're going to say that's going to be every buyer. So in which case you're probably not going to do that. We're all going to hope that they're not going to have to come out of pocket. But the point is, there is a way, a provision on this form for you to understand right away up front what the buyer's financial situation is, so that you can decide in your mind. It's something good for you to know before you go forward. And by the way, there's a form that you can use to do this, BFP, buyer financial personal information, but the form is not required. Just like the form on preferences is not right. So the only form that's actually required is this form. Okay, this is the only required form. And we have addendas, you don't have to use them. That's throwing some people. But I want you to understand this concept of proof of funds. It's only fair to, you could say, I believe you, I trust you, or you're just thinking, I know they're broke anyway, whatever. I mean, it's up to you. It's up to you how much documentation you want. And if you don't get sufficient documentation, you have every right to terminate the whole relationship right now. Over. Okay. All right. So that's part one. The buyer broker contract. We have to deal with this. We have no choice. This is it. And this is not just the settlement. This is going to be California law on the 1st of January. So, and this was happening anyway. Pretty much every state, in addition to the settlement, pretty much every state is going to have mandatory buyer broker contracts. So we got to deal with this. No more verbal, informal relationships with buyers. When you have a relationship with the buyer, it's just going to be like a relationship with the seller. You're going to have a contract. People say, what about dual agency? Well, same thing. It's perfectly legal, just like it always was. You can sell your own listing. So you're going to have a contract with the seller, the listing contract. You're going to have a contract with the buyer broker contract. You're going to have two different clients, two different contracts. Perfectly okay. But let's get to the important part. All right, how you get paid, because that's obviously very important. As I said, traditionally, it was very simple how you got paid, and your buyer had no say-so. Most transactions have always been in the MLS. There have always been off-market listings, but most are in the MLS. You looked on the MLS, the listing agent put a number, that was what you got paid. If you could close the deal, that's what you got paid. End of story. Very simple. That is gone. You look on the MLS, it says nothing about you getting paid by the listing agent. It's gone. So now how am I going to get paid? That's the question. I mean, the buyer just agreed to pay me, but they probably don't have any money. So how am I going to get paid? And this is the big change. The big change is it's just a different way of looking at it. You're going to get paid probably by the seller. But you've always gotten paid by the seller. Just traditionally, the seller gave extra money to the listing agent, so the listing agent could give some of it to you. Which, if you think about it logically, doesn't even make sense anyway. Why don't we just cut out the middleman? I mean, if the seller's paying, why don't they just pay the seller directly and pay the buyer directly? Why do they give extra money to the listing agent so the listing agent can pay the buyer's agent? Cut out the middleman. Instead of paying the listing agent like whatever, 5, 6, 7%, and then the listing agent giving maybe half of that to the buyer's agent, why not just pay the seller directly? I mean, the seller pays the listing agent directly, whatever, 3%, 2 or 3%, whatever, and also pay the buyer's agent. It's just a different mindset, but it's really the idea is the seller's going to save. So let me stop right here, because you may already be wondering this. I said a second ago, listing agents cannot offer compensation to buyer's agents through the MLS. But then you may say, well, can't listing agents still pay buyer's agents? I mean, maybe we have to deal with it. Can we still have agent-to-agent compensation? I know I can't do it through the MLS, but can we still have agent-to-agent compensation? And the answer is, it's a slightly complicated answer, is I cannot say that's illegal today. But you see, this whole thing is not over. There are already threatening new lawsuits. And the Federal Department of Justice, which is serious, that's the federal government, is basically going out there basically saying, we think the whole idea of brokers paying broker is a problem. So they're pushing for this. And when they push for something like this, they usually get it. So C.A.R. made the decision that we're going to tell you, you should probably just not think about broker to broker compensation. Just don't think about agent paying agent. Think about principal paying agent, which has always been the same thing anyway. I mean, traditionally, like I said, sellers paid extra money to one agent so that agent could share it with the other agent. If you were starting a real estate industry from scratch and you'd never done real estate before, you'd think that's kind of crazy. You know, it's funny when I talk to realtors recently who just got their license, who haven't done any deals yet, this all makes sense to them. It's only you guys it doesn't make sense to, because you've been doing it another way. But logically, it makes sense to new people. I get it. Buyer hires their agent, seller hires their agent. And if I talk to buyers and sellers, if they've never bought a house before, or if they never sold a house before, they're like, this makes sense what you're saying. It's only buyers and sellers who've done deals before who are going to be, just like you are, you're thrown by this change. But let's think this through then. Okay, so then how am I going to get paid? How do I get paid then as a buyer's agent? If the listing agent's not going to pay me, who's going to pay? The seller's going to pay you. Well, how does that work? You're going to ask the seller to pay in the purchase contract. Well, let's think about this big picture. All your life, you know, when you buy a house, there's a purchase price, but that never covers everything. To buy a house, other people have to get paid. The assessor needs transfer taxes. The title company needs to get paid. The escrow company needs to get paid. The NHD company needs to get paid. If it's an HOA, if it's a condo situation, the HOA needs to get paid. And of course, the agents need to get paid. Everybody needs to get paid. There's other people in real estate transactions who need to get paid. And the purchase price in and of itself doesn't cover that. These other things we call closing costs. That's just the way the business is structured. Now, you know, and I know that when a buyer typically writes an offer, I've seen a million offers, you have too, the buyer almost always checks the box: seller to pay title, seller to pay escrow, seller to pay transfer taxes, seller to pay HOA, seller to pay NHD. We're used to this idea. The idea being, buyer doesn't have any money to bring into escrow to pay these people. So it's really, if you think about it, it's built into the purchase price. They're offering the seller enough money that the seller agrees that they will take the responsibility of paying all these other people. And let's be serious about this. Seller doesn't even pay them anyway. Do your sellers ever go into their bank to bring money into escrow to pay the title company? No. Do they go to their bank to bring in money to pay the agent? No. They wait till the closing. The buyer brings all their money into escrow, and basically the seller says to the escrow, give some of that to title, you keep some, give some to the assessor, give some to my agent. I mean, sellers never come out of pocket unless it's a short sale. They just divert the buyer's money to various places. So this new concept is there's going to be one more thing they're going to divert, which is the buyer's agent's commission. In other words, the buyer is going to write on the offer, in addition to the closing costs I've always asked you for, there's one more: my agent's commission. You know what's always funny? I always see buyers, they check the box, seller to pay escrow, title, NHD, HOA, assessors, and then they put in something, and I want a $5,000 credit for non-recurring closing costs. Didn't you already ask for that by checking all those boxes? I want more. I mean, buyers, to pay down the loan, whatever. Buyers are used to doing this. They're used to asking seller for credits. And why are sellers willing to do this? Because it's sort of built into the price, and buyers finance it. Buyers basically saying, all these costs, I want to finance. So in other words, I'm going to ask you to agree to pay it so I don't have to bring the money into escrow, but it's all part of the price. It's all part of what I'm paying you. And sellers just figure out their bottom line. You know, what am I going to take? All I want to know is, what do I take home at the end? Right? That's always been it. So now, there's a new paragraph on the but it's been there for like a year because the forms committee knew this was coming. It's paragraph 3G3. You check a box and you say, buyer saying to the seller, I want you to pay my agent's commission. And they attach, and the seller says, well, how much is that? You're going to attach form, the SPD. I'm going to give you some inside information. The SPBB is going away. It's going to be built into the contract, which to me makes more sense. So in other words, you're going to write right in, instead of attaching an addendum to tell the seller how much you want them to pay, it's just going to be built in. But that's probably not going to happen until December. So for now, sorry, for the next couple of months, you got to deal with this SPBB. So for now, so let's say the buyer agrees to pay you whatever, 3%. So you're going to write the offer and check 3G3. You're going to fill out the SPBB, seller payment to buyer broker. There's only one blank on that form. How much? You fill it in, boom. So the seller's first reaction might be, why should I pay the buyer's agent? And your answer is going to be, you're going to have more work to do on the listing side. You're going to say, because you've always paid the buyer's agent. And you're going to say, remember last time I listed your house 10 years ago? Remember that? Remember how much you paid me in commission back then? Yeah, 6%. Well, you know what? I gave 3 of that to the buyer's agent. But have you noticed on this listing today, it's not 6%, was it? No. What was it? It was about 3, wasn't it? Yeah. But there's still going to be a buyer's agent, and they still need to get paid. So rather than you giving me 5 or 6 or 7 and having me share that, you're probably going to give me roughly half of that. And then the buyer's going to ask for it in the offer, their part. It works out the same. You're still paying the commissions. It's still built into the price. It's just rather than you paying me a lot so I can share it, you're paying me less. You're only paying me what I get. But then the buyer's going to ask you to pay their agent what they should get. And seller says, I still don't want to do it. Well, that's going to affect the buyers you get. Because if you won't do it, the buyer will probably go away and they'll buy something else where the seller is willing to pay it. It's not like it's going to cost you more. I mean, some sellers' reaction to this new thing is, this is great. I'm saving money because you don't have to pay the buyer. I'm not paying the buyer. That's wonderful. I just get a big discount. But buyers still need agents, still going to want agents. Agents need to get paid. Someone's going to have to pay them. It's going to be the seller. So it's going to affect the quality of offer. People are going to figure this out. You have to explain it to them. You just have to explain this new concept. Now, speaking of this, let's talk about the listing contract. There is one significant change on the listing contract. Remember, all the forms changed about a month ago. When it comes to compensation on the listing contract, up until a month ago, when you got to the compensation paragraphs, there were 2 blanks. The first blank was, what's the total commission the seller owes you? And that number tended to be 5, 6, 7, whatever. But then under that, there was another number, which is how much of that is the listing agent going to give to the buyer's agent? Because the seller had to authorize that. I mean, you can't share the commission that the seller was going to pay you without the seller authorization. But do you remember that the seller didn't really care too much? Because if they agreed to pay you, for example, 6, whether you offered 2.5, 3, 3.5 to the buyer's agent, they still paid you 6. So they didn't really care. It was like a strategy. But now they're going to care, of course, because the buyer's going to specifically ask them how much, to pay my agent a certain amount. What this really means, if you think about it, and this is what you don't like, but this is what we all have to deal with, is buyer's agents' commissions are now negotiable. Twice. Up until a month ago, up until a couple of weeks ago, when you were a buyer's agent, you didn't have to negotiate your commission at all. It was a number on the MLS. There it was. Now you're going to have to negotiate it twice. First, you're going to have to convince your buyer what you're worth. Then you're going to have to ask the seller to do it. So yes, more work, more transparency, and It's a new reality. But as your president said, tough times. I mean, you're going to deal with, I mean, you dealt with COVID. My goodness. You dealt with those forms, which are like a bad nightmare in my mind now. The PED form, I still have nightmares waking up PED form, just, you dealt with that. You're going to deal with this. You're going to deal with this, and you have no choice. People say, well, why did C.A.R. agree to this? Why did everyone agree to this? Why did Remax and Keller Williams and every big company, why did everyone agree to this? Believe me, all these entities have expensive lawyers. Unlike me, inexpensive lawyer. I mean, and they all got legal advice, and they all got the same legal advice. The same legal advice was, you better settle this because you're not going to win. I mean, Warren Buffett's attorney told him that, obviously, because otherwise he wouldn't have settled. Everyone settled because everyone saw that we were not going to win this argument. Why did C.A.R. give in to this? Everyone gave in to this because we weren't going to win this. These changes were going to happen, and they've happened. And so anyway, we have to deal with it. I'm almost ready for questions. Hold on. So we got the fundamental change to the buyer broker contract is new. You got that. Listing contract, instead of, to finish what I was saying. So the listing contract now in compensation, instead of having these two numbers, there's really just one number. It says, how much is the seller going to pay you for you? You know, it's kind of funny. If you think about the old listing form, it never actually said how much you were going to get. But anyone who went to first grade could figure it out, because it would say the total commission is whatever, 6%. And we're going to give the buyer's agent 3%. It never said how much you're going to get. But anyone who went to first grade could say, okay, 6 minus, I get 3 too. You know what I mean? I mean, you had to do that type of subtraction to figure out what you were going to get. On the new listing form, you don't have to do the first grade math. It simply says, seller will pay listing agent X for your services. In other words, what you're going to keep. Nowhere on the listing form does it say how much the listing agent is going to share, because you're not going to share that. That's all yours. You're not going to be paying the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent is going to take care of that by directly going to the seller. And the seller, you're going to educate the sellers, and sellers are going to figure out, as they always have, that it's in the seller's interest that the buyer has an agent, and a good agent, and a well-paid agent. I've said this for 40 years. Seller, it's not just good for the buyer that the buyer has a good agent. It's good for you that the buyer has a good agent. Those are the deals that actually are good deals that close and don't result in lawsuits. Have you ever done a deal where the other agent didn't know what they're doing? Or the buyer didn't even have an agent? Those are deals that don't close. Or if they do close, there's always problems after close. Seller, you want the buyer to have a good agent, and they're going to expect to get paid. And it's going to be built into the purchase price. I know what you're thinking. Worst case is, I have a listing, blah, blah, blah. Then the buyer has a buyer broker contract, and the buyer agrees to pay them whatever, a number. And the buyer asks the seller to pay it, and the seller counters, no, I'm not paying them. I'm just not paying them. Nothing for you. You're going to say to your buyer, okay, sorry, you have to pay me now. I don't want to pay you. I can't pay you. Well, I guess you can't buy the house then. I'm going to look you in the eye and say, so you're telling me the only thing standing between me and my dream house is you? And you say, yes. I have hungry children at home. I need to buy milk for my children. The only way I get the money to buy milk for my children is, just like you, I work and have a job and expect to get paid. So this is reality. By the way, in the 2 weeks that this has been going on, I've been talking to 1 million realtors. They're not getting a lot of pushback. It's actually working. I mean, there's few people who are totally confused, obviously. But so far, the people I've talked to, you tell me differently, people are sort of, you have to explain this to them. But it's and bottom line is, they can't go around you. Say, well, I'm sorry, since you won't agree to cut your commission. I'm just going to have to cancel the deal. I'm going to go around you. Well, remember I said you're still protected because you showed it to them, and they can't go around you. You can actually go to the escrow. So they can't go around you. I guess what they could do is sneak around you and go to a different escrow company with try to go directly. I mean, then you have to hire Jim Rockford to follow them around to make sure they're not buying something without you knowing. You younger people don't even know what I mean by Jim Rockford. A private eye. You have to hire a private eye, private investigator. I mean, theoretically, though, a buyer could, sneak around you and hook up with a seller and do a deal at a different escrow company you're not aware of and close the deal without you. Now what? Well, now you have 4 years to sue them. But if you figure this out before they close, you can stop it from closing. You have a contract. Just like the listing contract, it says when they sign this, they're irrevocably assigning to you through escrow your full commission. So anyway, but I mean, yes, and that's your worst fear. I'm sure it is that seller's not going to want to pay, buyer can't pay, and the deal's going to fall apart, whatever. I mean, anything is possible. Seller can counter the buyer and say, I'm not going to pay. The buyer's actually, well, then I better increase my offer then. In other words, if my buyer agrees to pay me X, so then I ask the seller to pay it, seller counters back. No, we're going to pay less than that. Go back to your buyer and say, well, either you owe me the money or maybe we should raise the price a little bit. And then they'll be willing to pay it. It's all negotiable. Or maybe, I know this is going to happen. Buyer says, seller, I want you to pay my commission. Seller says, yes. Then you get into escrow. And buyer starts asking for credits for repairs. Seller might say, well, if you cut the amount I have to pay your agent, I'll agree to pay I mean, it's all negotiable. And that's the new thing. It's just another closing cost that's negotiable. And it is. You can't not get away from this. This is the way it is. So, as I said, in my opinion, agents are worth more than you ever have been. I think you have to convince your clients of this, and they'll realize it. If they start trying to if sellers start trying to not pay buyers' agents, there'll be consequences. Well, what about buyers who say, I don't even need an agent. I'm just going to buy it myself. Good luck. Good luck getting your offer accepted. Good luck closing the deal if it does get accepted. I mean, people are going to figure this out, which leads to another point. 2 more things, and then I'm going to take questions. This is something that's totally confusing people, so I wish it weren't there. The concept of the self-represented buyer. I mean, before what's happened now, occasionally there have been buyers out there who think they don't need an agent. And you know what they do? They go to the seller and say, you need to give me a discount because I don't have an agent, so your agent isn't paying the agent, so give me discount because I don't have an agent. Or maybe you're buying it yourself, you're an agent. You say to the seller, I'm not getting a commission here, so blah, blah, blah. Okay. The concept of the unrepresented buyer. Now, the forms committee was thinking this may happen more than it used to. So we should think about this and put something in the listing contract. So this is confusing a lot of people, but there's a line in the listing contract now that says, if the buyer is unrepresented, maybe there should be extra compensation for the listing agent. So imagine this scenario. You're a listing agent, you get a phone call from somebody, buyer. Hey, I want to see that listing. And you say, great, have your agent come by and show it to you. Oh, I don't have an agent. Your next question is going to be, do you want to hire me as your agent? I'd be glad to do it. I can be your agent just like I'm the seller's agent. And then they say, no, I just don't want an agent at all. But I still want to see the house. But I said a little while ago, you can't show them the house without a buyer-broker contract. So they say, I still want you to show me the house. Yeah, but you have to sign a contract. I don't want to sign a contract. Now what? Here's what I want you to do. at the time you take the listing, you should always have this conversation with your seller. And the question is, seller, how do you want me to deal with people who don't have agents? People who contact me and they want to see the property, but they don't have an agent. Seller might say, ignore them. I do not want to deal with people without agents. I just don't want to do it. That's another possibility is your brokerage could make the decision as a brokerage. We don't want to deal with unrepresented buyers. You could even tell your own seller, by the way, if there's an unrepresented buyer out there, I'm not even going to help you. I don't want to do it. That's a possibility. But the seller might say to you, I know they don't have agents, but who knows? They might end up writing the best offer. So I authorize you to help unrepresented buyers. In other words, help them for the benefit of me. So in this, getting back to my scenario where the buyer calls you up who doesn't have an agent, I want to see the house. Well, you've already talked to your seller, says, okay, great, I'll meet you at the house. You don't have an agent? Fine, I'll meet you there. And you let them in. Do you show it to them? Well, you sort of show it to them, but you basically, before you even do anything, you give them this form called the BNA, Buyer Non-Agency. You're giving them the form and you're saying, I want you to understand something. This is not a regular showing. A regular showing is you have your own agent who's helping you, trying to help you. I'm not going to try to help you. I'm not your friend. I'm the seller's friend. Any information I give you, I'm giving you for the benefit of my client. But my client wants me to, at a minimum basis, answer some of your questions. But I'm doing it not for you. I have no responsibility. I have no fiduciary duty to you. I am the seller's friend. I'm your enemy. No, I'm not kidding. Don't go that far. But the point is, if your seller is okay with it, and make sure the buyer signs this form, you can actually let them in and show them around without a buyer broker contract. But make sure you jump through those hoops. Now they say, great, now that I've seen the house, I want to write an offer. And you say, go ahead and you have your agent. Oh, you don't have an agent. Yeah, but I want to write an offer. Well, how can they write an offer? You could say, well, go write an offer, present it. But maybe you and your seller have already had this discussion and the seller has told you, if this unrepresented person wants to write an offer, I authorize you to give them the C.A.R. purchase contract. Because if they write an offer, I'd like to see it on that form. Yes, you have the right to give somebody who's not your client C.A.R. forms if you have a client and your client wants you to. Let me contrast this. If you don't have a listing, if you do not have a listing, you are not allowed to give C.A.R. forms to somebody until they sign up with you as a contract. So don't give anyone any contract as a buyer until they've signed a buyer representation contract. But if you already have a client, the seller, you have a client relationship already, if you and your client think it's to your benefit to give this unrepresented person C.A.R. forms, do it. You're not going to help them fill it out, but you can give them the form. I've been getting all these calls, oh, this is terrible. Then don't do it. You don't have to do it. But if you and your seller want to do it because you think it's in the seller's best interest, you're allowed to. Then, of course, they're going to write an offer, and probably crappy offer because they don't know what they're doing. But your seller say, well, counter it and fix it up because I like how much money they're offering, so I really might want to sell it to them. Think about the scenario I've just described. You're the seller's agent, but your seller wants you to deal with this unrepresented person, which is requiring you to do a lot more work because you're going to have to meet this person at the property for their inspections and all this stuff. Maybe you should get paid extra for that. That's why there's a blank on the listing form now that you can skip if you want. But right underneath where it says what they're going to pay you, there's another blank says, and if the buyer's unrepresented, we're going to give you more. Probably not a full buyer's agent commission. You see what I'm saying? But there's two possibilities. One is you're a dual agent. You have the seller and the buyer. They both sign contracts. Great. But the other possibility is you're only representing the seller, but there's this unrepresented person who you're helping out for the benefit of the seller. If that's the first of all, you don't have to do this. But if you're willing to do it, maybe you should get paid extra for that. Just a thought. So that's a new blank on the contract. Last thing before questions is open houses. Think about open houses just like I was just talking about. When you're really hosting an open house, you're dealing with unrepresented buyers, right? Because people walk into the open house. People just stumble in sometimes. Drug addict just stumbles into the open house. They want to look around. They want you to show them around. Can you show them around? Well, the first thing you're going to do is, oh, you're interested? You want to sign my buyer broker contract? I can represent you. They say, no, this is an open, I don't want to sign anything. It's an open house. I want to look around. But I want you to answer my questions. Same concept. If you're the listing agent, you can answer their questions if they understand that you're the listing agent and loyal to the seller, not to them, which is why we have a new form. I know you guys, when you do an open house, you always have a sign-in sheet. You always want the visitor to sign in saying, just giving you their information, obviously, so you can call them later and try to get them as a client. What I'm recommending is starting today, instead of using your old sign-in sheet, use the C.A.R. sign-in sheet, OHNA, Open House Non-Agency sign-in sheet. Because when they sign this form, the visitor it's just like signing that BNA form for the unrepresented buyer at a showing. This form says, I understand that the agent here is not my agent. In fact, I understand they are the seller's agent. And I understand any communication I have with this person is for the benefit of the seller. They owe me no fiduciary duty at all. I also understand that anything I tell them is not confidential since they're not my agent. If they're willing to sign that, yeah, show them around, because they can't come back later and say, well, this agent was showing me a house and they didn't make me sign a contract. Well, you signed something acknowledging that. Because trust me, there are already people going to open houses trying to get you in trouble. I'm telling you. Get them to sign it. So what if the visitor, the drug addict, won't sign the form? I'm not signing anything. Don't show them around. Do I have to turn into a bouncer and throw them out? No. Give them the donuts, give them the flyer, give them the bottled water, but don't answer their questions, because they could be setting you up. They really could, I swear to God. So you're just saying, listen, if you're not willing to acknowledge the fact that I'm not your agent, that's all I'm asking you to do is acknowledge that I'm not your agent. If you're not willing to do that, walk around, knock yourself out. You can even follow them around, make sure they don't steal anything, but don't help them. Don't show them. So I know. All right, that's a lot. I bet you have some questions. So go ahead.
Gov, right here, online.
Oh, online.
Up front, here we go.
We'll take turns, online and in person.
So Mr. Enos has a question, and his question is, what do we do with existing listing agreements that we have prior to the new forms?
I should have brought that up. Okay. So if you had, when the rules changed, by the way, what's your MLS here? Do you know when the changeover happened? The 17th? The 15th. Okay. So if you had a listing, okay, if you were in escrow before the 15th, proceed and close like the old way. But if you had a listing on the 15th that you hadn't sold yet, you have to amend that listing. We got to form DMLA, Disclosure and Modification of Listing Agreement. And that form basically tells your seller, when you took this listing, you and I agreed that I was going to offer compensation in the MLS. You agreed you were going to pay me something like, let's say, for example, 5, and I was going to put 2.5 in the MLS. Since we've hit that D-Day, we're amending the listing. The good news for you is you don't owe me 5 anymore, because I had to take off the offer of compensation. So in other words, there is no more offer of compensation, but you only owe me, 5 minus whatever, the original number minus whatever we were offering. So you have to amend your listing if you're in that situation. All right. How about someone from here in the room?
Hi, I got an offer and they marked the box for the SPBB,
Right.
but they did not forward the SPBB. They only forwarded the buyer broker agreement. So I called C.A.R.
Yeah.
And I was informed, well, the buyer is presenting you a very confusing offer and that I should not tell the buyer's agent to present me this SPBB unless the seller requests it.
Yeah.
So how is the seller going to request it when they don't know? And
But I think, are you telling me that the buyer did check the box that they want the seller to pay the buyer's agent commission?
Yes.
They just didn't tell them how much.
no,
Right. I mean,
other than what's on the buyer agreement that they forwarded as well.
right. But just because it was on the buyer broker contract doesn't mean they're necessarily asking that.
Correct.
I mean, it's up to the seller. I mean, the seller could, if I were the seller, I'd say, just tell them that they don't know what they're doing. Tell them to give me tell them to do it right. I mean, I guess theoretically the seller could say, oh, let's take advantage of this. Let's just accept their offer. They think we're going to pay their commission, but we're not. And then we're going to get ready to close and they're going to figure out they're not getting paid. I guess the seller could take that position, but probably when the buyer finds out, their agent will don't close because I'm not going to get paid. It could cause problems.
Right.
Like I said, so the seller has a choice.
Yeah, but the
Seller-
attorney says, don't say anything. So
No, I
my-
don't say anything without talking to the seller
No,
first.
The seller has to tell me about it, she was saying. The attorney said,
Well,
advised.
the attorney should, you should get advantage of the fact that they didn't do it the right way. Maybe
Thank
we
you.
can get away with closing the deal and not paying them and I'd save some money. The other seller may say, I know what they're asking. Let's try to get them to do it right. It's your seller's decision. It really is. Good question. Yeah.
If one of the agents is holding an open house
Yeah.
for the listing office or for a listing that's not a listing office, do they sign the same form?
That's such a good question. There's a practice out there that I've never liked, but you guys do it. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but doing an open house when it's not your listing. And I mean, it's not even your company's listing. That's always risky. I've always thought that was risky because your E&O doesn't cover it. Your E&O only covers you on E&O on open houses unless if it's your company's listing. But anyway, but you want to do it and you have a friend at a different company and they want to host their open house and you're willing to do it. That means you're not the listing agent. That means you're just a potential buyer's agent. That means if anyone comes into that open house and wants to be shown around, if they won't sign a buyer broker contract, you can't help them. You don't have to kick them out, but you're really there as just a random potential agent. You cannot help them because you can't give them a form that says, hey, I'm the seller's agent, because you're not the seller's agent. So you can do this, but they're going to try to get you in trouble. Do not help people at open houses unless you are in the listing office or they sign some type of buyer broker contract. Now, this is the time for me to mention real quick that we do have another version of the buyer broker contract. So I spent the first half hour talking about this BRBC, but let's say you're at an open house. Someone walks in, it's your listing, and the buyer, this visitor, all of a sudden, you show them around, and they say, I like this house. And you say, well, buy it then. I mean, other people are going to, you better get an offer in quick. And you say, why don't you just hire me? I'll write the offer for you. Yeah, but I just met you, blah, 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 blah. And they're reluctant to sign the BRBC. I got another choice for you. How about this? You commit to just me for 2 weeks. You basically say, if I buy this house, I have to use you if I buy it in the next 2 weeks. So we got this form called the PSRA, Property Showing and Representation Agreement. Instead of being 3 months, it says not to exceed 30 days. And instead of being any property, you just list 1, 2, or 3 properties. You're basically saying, if you buy one of these 3 properties in the next 3 weeks, I'm your agent. Of course, this is not necessarily a great thing because then they wait 3 weeks and then write it up with their other agent. I'm not saying this is definitely a great thing, but it may be a way just to get them in the door. They don't want to sign the big form, but they're willing to sign something. So at least you can write an offer for them real quick. So in other words, we have a short, light version of the buyer broker contract if you need it. Yeah. Press the bottom, they said. I can just hear you and repeat the question, but whatever.
Okay, going back to the listing modification
Yeah,
for
yeah.
existing listings.
Right.
At the bottom of that, there's a box.
Yeah.
And it says will not or would not discount
Right.
the full amount.
I mean, theoretically, okay, remember I just said on this, I have a listing, it was in effect the 15th. I have to modify it. I have to tell them that no longer is there an offer of compensation out there, but then there's a place, and I'm also going to reduce the commission you owe me by that amount. But there's a checkbox where you can check that saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I would not advise checking that. But they're going to come back later and say, they took advantage of me. I didn't know what I was doing, blah, blah, blah. If I were the forms committee, I wish that option wasn't even there, but it is there. Where, and maybe they love you so much. They just love you. And they were willing to pay you this big number. And now you're not going to share it. They love you so much, they're still willing you to pay the big number. Even though the buyer is probably now going to ask for more money in the offer. But theoretically, yeah. My personal advice is not to check that.
Gov, question here.
Yeah.
If a buyer has a non-exclusive contract with another agent, is there any reason I cannot sign an exclusive agreement? And if I do sign an exclusive agreement, do I need to proactively exclude any properties shown by that agent?
Yeah. Yeah. Very good question. Okay. So you meet someone, they like you, they want to hire you, but they tell you, I already have a non-exclusive contract with somebody else. There are various options here. One of them tell them, well, just cancel them. But then you're going to ask them, have they shown you any properties? Yeah, they'd show me a couple. Well, then we better exclude them. And there's a blank on the first page. We better exclude those properties from our new exclusive contract, because even if you cancel them, or whether you cancel them or not, if they buy one of those two properties, that agent has earned a commission. So obviously you could try to take advantage of them and not exclude them, in which case they're going to owe 2 commissions, but you're not going to do that. And some buyers are going to be confused. They're going to do that. Some buyers are going to sign a non-exclusive with one agent and then hire an exclusive one with somebody else, which means if they end up buying one of the houses that the first agent showed them, they owe commissions to both. And you're going to try to help people avoid this. So like I said, if someone approaches you, you're always going to find out if they already have a contract. If they already have a contract, you're going to say, well, we better exclude from our contract any properties that agent has already shown you. And here's another thing. It's interesting. When I said buyers can do more than one non-exclusive, when I say you've earned a commission on a non-exclusive, that means if you've either shown it to them, written an offer, or done a market analysis. If you've done any of those things, you've earned it. So here's what I'm worried is going to happen sometimes is a buyer hires agent number 1 and agent number 2. Agent number 1 shows them a house, but they say they want to write it up with agent number 2. They now owe 2 commissions because each one has earned a commission. The first one earned it by showing it to them. The second one earned it by writing it up. So you're going to have to explain to your buyers, if they sign a non-exclusive, any property I show you, I have to be the one to write it up. Because if you go somewhere else, you may have to pay 2 commissions. Hopefully people figure this out. Hopefully people will not do non-exclusives. Hopefully people just like on listings, people will probably get the hang of it and do exclusives. Like I said, it could be confusing for a while here. You guys are probably already experiencing it. But people, in my optimistic self, they're going to figure this out, I hope. But that's a good question.
Should it be a new practice for us to start calling other agents and asking if your sellers going to be offering concessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. And I should have talked about that, brought that up anyway. So up until now, as I said, you knew as a buyer's agent, you knew before you did anything how much you're getting paid. Before you even showed a buyer a house, you knew if they bought that house, you knew exactly how much you got paid. Unfortunately, those days of certainty are gone. Because if you think what I'm saying, I know how much the buyer is going to agree to pay me when they sign that contract. But we don't know yet if the seller is going to be willing to do that. So I could be showing them the house. Knowing before you even start working exactly how much you're going to get paid. And you're not going to know that anymore. So the question he's asked, a very good question, is, well, maybe I want to know that. Can I contact the listing agent before I even do anything and say, by the way, do you think will your seller pay my agent's commission? Will they pay my commission? And you're hoping that the listing agent is going to say, for sure, we will pay 2.5, 3, whatever. But you're really not going to get that commitment. First thing is, you can't even make that commitment. I mean, I've seen this already where agents are putting on their website, my seller will pay 2.5, whatever on this one. Or they put it on their signs. I've seen it in lockbox, little thing they snick into the lockbox. They're trying to communicate, my seller will pay X. Point number one, that's meaningless because it's not binding. So if the seller put on their website, if you put on your website, the property website, seller will pay whatever, then the buyer writes an offer and they ask the seller to pay, seller counters. I'm not doing it. You said on your website. Well, that wasn't a commitment. And it's not a commitment. That's not binding. You could advertise it all over the world on Instagram and anywhere. It's not binding. That's point number one. Point number two, why would your seller want to commit to anything? The whole point is it's negotiable. You don't want to tie your seller down to committing to pay buyer's agent X. That's going to depend on the offer, the overall terms of the offer. So it would be against your fiduciary duty to get the seller to even try to commit it, and they can't commit it anyway. What you should do, I think, is if your seller wants to communicate this, put something on the website along the lines of highly motivated seller, definitely willing to consider offers that request seller concessions. Don't specifically say, highly motivated seller, definitely willing to consider offers requesting payment of buyer's agent commission. You could do that, but I'm paranoid, worried about lawsuits accusing you of not following not the specifics of the settlement, but the basic theme of the settlement. The whole idea, I think the way to look at this is, the big thing that happened is the listing side, the selling side, the seller side, listing seller side should not in any way predetermine the buyer's agent's compensation. So you can't say listing agent's going to pay, but the argument is, even if the seller says, I'll pay X, that's the seller trying to predetermine what the other side gets paid. Can I say to you right now that that is definitely illegal? No, it's not. But we're trying to look ahead. We're trying to look ahead, and we don't want any more lawsuits. We don't want the Department of Justice involved. So you can call them up. Yes, you can call up the listing agent and say, if I were, my response to you would be always put it in the offer. If it's a good offer, my seller will pay anything. If it's a good offer, we'll pay your kid's college education. Write that in the offer. this is my price and I want this and this, and I want the seller to buy me a car. If it's a good enough offer, I'll buy you a car. If it makes sense to me with my bottom line, I will buy you a Porsche because it makes sense. Of course I'll pay your buyer's agent. I'll pay anything. You're just asking for a credit. We're negotiating here. This has always happened. Buyers always ask the seller to pay things. Up until now, it's been escrow, title, NHD, blah. Now you're asking one more thing, but you can always ask for whatever you want. Make your offer good enough so that it makes sense to the seller. That's the way we have to look at it. So having said this, let me continue my thought. Some MLSs, and I don't know about yours, have a new checkbox. Yours don't have it. Okay. I won't even bring it up when I'm talking about it. But I should say this. Some MLSs have a checkbox where the seller can check a box that says, yes, I am definitely willing to consider offers that request seller concessions. What seller wouldn't be willing to? Would you ever want to tell the whole world, don't even think about asking for any credits. I will not consider your offer. Who would do that? Every seller in the world has always considered offers that request credits because that's the way it works. So anyway, that's why I don't think it matters if your MLS has it or doesn't. Who cares? Getting back to his original question, yes. If it's perfectly okay to call up listing agent and say, how's your seller feel about paying buyer's agent commissions? Your answer should always be, put it in the offer. They will definitely consider it. You're never going to say to them, no way ever my seller would consider, no matter how great, even your offer is twice as good as any other offer, no way are we paying the buyer's agent commission. That's not, I mean, I think we're going to get past this. I don't need to know this. I think I'm going to assume as a buyer's agent that every seller is going to be okay with this. Why wouldn't they be? As long as it works, as the numbers work. Every seller is going to be willing to do this if the numbers work, period. And by the way, here's good news, is this new seller credit we're recommending that you asked for, the lending industry has already said, we're not going to count this against our cap, our lender credit cap. See, the whole lending industry understands this. VA understands this. VA just changed the rule that says people getting VA financing, you can agree that the buyer can pay their agent. It used to be VA buyers could not pay their agent. Now they can. Appraisers are now taking this into account. Assessors are now taking this into account. The entire world, the United States of America real estate industry. You can't say, oh, I don't like this, I'm moving to Tennessee. No, it's the same in Tennessee. It's the same everywhere. Everyone is dealing with the same thing, and it's not going to change. And we have to deal with this. There's no magical lawsuit that's going to happen out there that's going to change all this. As I said, all these defendants with their incredibly expensive attorneys advise them to settle.
We're talking that they were gonna start asking about the approval funds.
Yeah.
Talking about BAs, a lot of the people that are BAs, they're thinking because they're BAs, they shouldn't be putting any money out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So my question is like, how are you gonna ask for approval funds? Is a lot of these people don't even have any money.
Well, you don't even have
Or
to.
like Alshafa, where
Yeah.
they have
Right.
like $2,000 or $3,000 in the bank.
Yeah.
So how will you
Well,
be
that's a
able
good question. I mean, if you have a buyer, like a VA buyer or a CalHFA buyer, and you know they have no money, you don't have to insist on it. I mean, and the point is there's a provision in the buyer broker contract that says buyer will tell you about their financial personal information. Maybe all it's going to mean is they're going to tell you, I don't have any money. That's my personal financial information. I'll tell you, and you're going to deal with that like you've always dealt with it. So it's not like they have to. You probably know going in, if it's a low income buyer or a VA buyer, you probably know going in that the seller's going to have to pay because the buyer just can't pay. And that's fine. It's just that if you want to, you can insist that the buyer gives you some evidence of, maybe you trust them, whatever. You're entitled to ask for them to give you some type of like, how much do you have in the bank, liquid assets that you can have? They may say none of your business, and you're going to decide. They might say none of your business or nothing. in which case you'll decide how to you can still work with them. It's just, yes, I wouldn't.
And my
System.
second
Yeah.
question, because
Yeah.
looking about the lawsuits, it's all seller, seller, seller,
Right,
seller.
right.
But I'm looking more like on the buyer side now. How are protected are they with the contracts? So I'll give an example. I think I know a lot of people notice we're getting a lot of people from out of towns.
Yeah,
They come with their agents.
right.
And what happens with some of these agents, they're not even really doing their job. They're not even coming and showing the properties.
Yeah,
And sometimes you get people where they're like, hey, I don't
Yeah.
even want to work with this guy
Right.
because
right,
he's not even bothering to take the time to bring me over here,
right.
but they're stuck with 90 days. I just kind of wonder, like, it might start getting the possibility a lot of buyers will start doing lawsuits or something because, hey, now I'm on a contract
Yeah.
for 90 days. I can't even buy it because I'm stuck with this guy. And I can't even go over there and look at properties because they don't want to show it to me. So
Well,
I just wonder-
maybe buyers are gonna figure this out. And maybe buyers are gonna realize, if I want to buy a property in Bakersfield, I better get a Bakersfield agent. Maybe they're gonna realize that, like you said, because they're gonna like you said, they're gonna sign a contract with this person. And how is this agent gonna earn their compensation if they won't even go with me up to, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
buyers maybe figure this out. This is nothing new here. There's nothing new with buyers complaining about their agents aren't helping them. That's always been an issue. Maybe it'll become more of an issue. Here's one thing in the back of your mind that you're not going to like, but but it's already occurred to you, is for the first time, buyers can negotiate compensation. You know what this means? I mean, it used to be every buyer's agent got paid the same thing. If there was a listing on the MLS and they were offering whatever percentage, you got it. Even if you were a good agent or a bad agent, you got that number. But you can imagine some agents now going to buyers and saying, that guy over there is going to charge you X. I'm going to charge you less. In other words, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm cheap. And you're going to counter that the same way listing agents have always countered the discount listing agents that have been around as long as I've been, Help You Sell, Purple Brick, all these other companies that have gone to sellers and said, don't list with them, list with me for less. These companies, they don't tend to survive because people realize you get what you pay for. So, but you may run into this on the buyer side too. Competitors are going to jump into the business saying, we don't charge the same, and you're going to deal with that like you deal with on the listing side. You're gonna explain your value and prove your value and your track record and blah blah blah. But that's just reality. So, yeah, yeah, right,
to one of our clients, you need to sign this form for me to show you the property. We explain the contract to the buyer, but now they're saying they're not gonna pay.
yeah. So the builder, I think they sound a little confused. The building situation shouldn't be any different. I mean, so in other words, if you're just going to bring the buyer in and register them with the builder, and the builder pays your referral fee, same as it always was. Now, another possibility though is you're working with this buyer who wants to buy this new home, but they want you to show it to them. I mean, if the builder's going to show it to them, that's the builder showing them their own property, or the builder's agent's going to show it to them. That's not a problem. But if you're the buyer's agent and you're not just registering them with the builder, you're actually going to show them, even if you're just showing them a model. If you're showing them the house, you need the contract. For compensation, just put the amount that the builder is paying, paying them the referral fee. So in other words, they still have to authorize you to get that money, but it should be pretty straightforward. You're just going to put on the form, you're going to put whatever the builder's paying. And if there's no showing involved, if it's just you bringing them to the builder, nothing should be different at all so in your case,
Like, we show the client property.
you showed them other properties.
Right.
So you already have a buyer broker contract.
Work. He didn't go to work, so he decided, I'm gonna go ahead and go to all these new construction.
Right. Okay.
So you have to buy a broker.
Right.
still apply where we can take that form to escrow, so we. can
Yeah.
wait?
So in other words, probably what you're gonna, I'm not telling you what to do, but if you have a buyer broker contract where the buyer agreed to pay you X, and they end up trying to buy this new house where the builder referral fee to you is less. I mean, you could let it go. You could say, okay, since that's the one you're buying, I will agree to reduce what you already agreed to pay me because you're buying a new house. It's less work for me. You can do that. Or you could say, you could play hardball and say, no, you got to pay me whatever you agreed to pay me. If the builder's not paying me, you got to pay the difference. I mean, it's up to you how you want to handle that situation. Because you're right. Most of the time when you're working with a buyer, they're not just looking for brand new homes. So you've already got a contract with them. And by the way, it's to make more work for you, but you could have a different buyer broker contract for each property they see. That's a lot more work for you. But you could come up with two, and this is the one if you buy a brand new home. This is the one if you buy something else, different amounts. I mean, and you could research, that's something you could research up front, how much the builder referral fee is. So you could have a buyer, all right, if you buy a used home, this is it, but this is the form for if you buy new construction from this builder, because you already know how much that builder is going to pay you. You know, it's all possible.
Right here, Gov. With no broker to broker compensation, what then happens to referral fee agreements existing and new?
Yeah, you could still pay referral fees to each other. Yeah, I should have made that clear. When I say no broker to broker compensation, I was not talking about referral fees. Continue to do referrals the way you've always done them. No problem. No problem. Referral fees. The broker to broker compensation I'm talking about is listing broker paying buyer broker their paying them in a purchase transaction. And I'm not saying it's illegal yet. You guys
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, I have a seller and we talked like 6 months ago
Yeah.
about him selling the property and
Yeah.
we agree on a 4 he's like, Yoli, let's list the property. And then now it's different, right? So I talked to him and I
Yeah.
wrote the contract paying me 2.5. And I say, I'm hoping to negotiate, with the buyer's agent because he's willing to pay concessions to pay the 2% out. But now I'm thinking, what if the agent is like, no, I want 2.5 or more than that? Is it okay if I reduce my commission or can I contribute to the buyer's agent, to?
Remember, I think you should just
Sure.
start all over, do a new listing
Mhm.
that you're not going to talk about in the listing paying the buyer's agent, right? You're not going to talk about the seller paying either. Just leave it open.
No, I didn't wrote it 6
Yeah.
months ago. I just wrote it last week. So
Okay.
that's how I wrote it, paying me 2.5. But my client is thinking that his max on paying agents is 4.5%. So in his mind, he's like,
Well,
okay,
that's
I'm
his
gonna pay
mind. But I
two.
mean, who knows?
Yeah,
If the offer is good enough, you know what I mean?
yeah, but
The whole mentality of sellers should not be how much am I willing to pay the buyer's agent? The mentality is based on the offer
Mhm.
in whole,
yeah,
what makes sense.
yes.
So I
I
think
agree.
you try to get out of your seller's mind, this whole idea is I'm willing to pay
A
the other
number, so
agent
they
a
should have a
number.
number,
They just
right?
shouldn't have a
They
number
should
in their
say
mind.
yeah,
They
yeah.
should see what the offer is.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it shouldn't work. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that should work.
Hold on, just real quick. I think what she's saying is that a listing agent, are we able to reduce our commission
You can
to make
always,
it work?
you can
to
always
contribute.
reduce yours. Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah, just like buyer's agents can reduce theirs. Your client will never complain if you reduce the commission. They will never have a problem with that.
Hello? Yes,
Yes.
I kind of have a two-part
Yeah.
question. My understanding is that sellers are not bound by the settlement. They can do anything they want.
Theoretically, yeah.
And if they want to make an irrevocable offer of compensation to a buyer's agent, I would think they're perfectly free to do
But how would
so.
they even do that if they wanted
Well,
to?
In the listing agreement, in the multiple listing service addendum, paragraph 5B2,
Right. That
it
authorizes,
says sellers can put it in writing that they're offering compensation.
No, it
if
says,
they
it doesn't say
specify
that.
an amount.
It doesn't say that specifically. It
Even if
says,
permitted by the MLS, no amount of the possible concession will be stated in the MLS, either as a percentage
possible.
of the purchase
What is
price
the word you say? Possible
or a flat
concession.
fee, unless the
Right.
seller notifies broker in writing.
But that
the
wouldn't be
amount.
binding. In other words, even, by the way, your MLS doesn't allow this anyway, but even if you had an MLS that said you can put in the MLS, and by the way, I don't think any MLS is allowing this, but even if hypothetically the MLS says you can put in the MLS, seller will pay buyer's agent X. That's not enforced. That's not binding. That's not enforceable. You can say that all you want, and then you write an offer and the seller says no. Putting that language there is not binding. The MLS isn't going to allow it anyway, but even if they did, it's not binding.
Well, wouldn't the
but-
agreement between the broker and the,
I mean, MLS
The
is
seller
an
be binding?
advertising. You could maybe try to accuse them of false advertising. I don't think that's going to work either.
no, this is in the listing agreement.
No, but
That's a
in the listing
binding
agreement, the seller, I
between-
know what you're talking about. The seller is authorizing.
They're
You're
making
saying the
agreement-
seller is authorizing the listing agent to communicate that the seller is willing to pay, or that you, if you say willing, that's fine. But there's no way to make that binding. I mean, every seller in the world is willing, as I keep saying, every seller in the world is definitely willing. Write me a good enough offer. Of course I'm willing to pay, but there's no way you can get a commitment. There's no way a seller could legally, so say, forget the MLS. The heck with the MLS. I'm going to put on my website, I promise I will pay buyer's agent. That's
then-
not enforceable.
Why would that non-binding offer be capable of being listed in the MLS, just like the patio furniture is included?
Well, that's because the MLS's expensive attorneys are advising them. If you allow that, you're going against the spirit of the settlement and you're vulnerable to future lawsuits. Don't question the MLS. They have expensive attorneys advising them on what they need to do. And they're all doing the same thing, which means they're all getting the same advice. So you're just not going to be able to go there. You're just not going to be able to do it.
What are the actual repercussions for violating this?
Yeah.
For showing a property without a BRBC?
Yeah, the violation, number one, if the MLS finds out about it, they can fine you. Number two, if one of these people out there trying to catch you finds out about it, they can sue you. And starting January 1st, when it becomes California law, the DRE can take away your license. So there are serious consequences. Those of you who want to ignore what I'm saying today, seriously, there are serious potential consequences. I know they're bad. They're not. Me. Maybe no one's going to catch them. Who knows? But that's always been true in real estate. People do bad things and they don't get caught. The scary thing to me is I see people already out there trying to catch you. Go ahead.
On a buyer broker contract, on exclusive, can the buyer cancel or fire a real estate agent without giving them a 30-day notice and holding the buyer hostage for 30 days?
Not an exclusive. Our form says 30 days. So if you have an exclusive buyer broker contract, the buyer, if they want to terminate the relationship, they have to give you 30 days notice.
So technically, like if they can't get a hold of their agent anymore, anything, there's.
Oh, I see. Good question. You can always fire someone for cause. Just like on a listing. When I said before, when someone lists with you for 4 months, they can't get out of it. Unless you don't do your job. I mean, if you agree in the listing contract, I'm going to market this and do this, and you just don't do it, that's a breach of contract. If it's a breach of contract, they can terminate you, of course. Same thing on a buyer broker contract. I mean, if you don't do what you're supposed to be doing as a good agent, that's a separate grounds for immediate termination. Everybody's going like this and this, yes. Whoever, just start talking. Online. Are you going to read out? Okay.
What is the name of that form again?
OHNA. OHNA, Open House Non-Agency Sign-In Sheet. Welcome.
So, who's supposed to police the bad acting buyers?
I just answered that. I mean, but maybe you're saying,
Buyers.
who's going to turn them in?
Yes.
I mean, obviously, if there's a bad agent out there who's,
No, buyers, not buyers agents, like buyers. If I'm representing a buyer and they ghost me after a month and then I see on their Instagram or like, am I supposed to like talk to title like every week?
well, that's the thing. I mean, actually, you're saying, in other words, you don't merely mean police, you mean make sure they're not going around me and avoiding paying me. Jim Rockford, you're going to hire I mean, you have to, I know how do you have to keep track of what they're doing. I mean, you're right. If buyers are just like sellers, if they're going to go around you and try to like take advantage of you, you got to try to figure it out. Good. Yeah.
The builder
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
There are listing agents that represent builders
Right.
in Bakersfield,
Right.
such as myself.
Right.
And we actually have the buyer's agent involved in the transaction. We do not pay referral fees. We have them as the buyer's agent representing their
So the
buyer.
builder doesn't pay them.
The builder will consider consent.
Oh, so just like any other seller. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right.
Am I or am I not in a position to be able to convey to them what the builder's willing to pay? Because then I'm setting a number.
Right. In other words, I'm talking about different scenario. You're telling me your builder clients are just like any other seller. What I was referring to is the builder who's basically, they don't want the buyer's agent to be involved at all. They just said, bring them in. Don't do any licensed work. Just bring them in. Give me their name. We'll pay them a referral fee. Because remember I said before, referral fees are fine. Referral fees are the same. If you're not doing the working, if you're not doing the writing the offer or, showing the property, of course you can get paid a referral fee and you don't need a contract because you need a contract to do licensed work. The fact that I can get paid is because I have a license, but I'm not doing anything the referral. I'm referring and they're paying me. That's fine. Builder can pay a referral fee. Another agent can pay a referral fee. This doesn't change that. I'll repeat it.
What is the broker's oversight responsibility for the RBCs?
Just like anything else. I mean, yes, the broker, you're going to get in trouble if your agents don't do it right. If that's what you're asking, this is just like everything else. Brokers are ultimately responsible, for sure. By the way, when you sign a buyer-broker contract, Hutchinson, but I happen to work for ABC Realty, and in the course of the transaction, I want to refer it to another person in my office, or maybe I'm busy and I don't have time to show it, but I ask my friend in the office, you don't need another buyer representation agreement. The buyer representation agreement covers the entire company, the entire brokerage. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. So we know buyers will do anything to get their way to get us to show them a property.
Right.
So, well, let's say that they already hired an agent, they
Right.
signed a BRBC exclusive.
Right.
They come to us and they say they don't have one.
Yeah.
What do we do? Like,
Well, if they're
there's
dumb
two-
enough to do that and then they sign you, now they owe 2 commissions.
Okay.
So that's not in their interest to do that, and they'll figure it out. By the way, this whole procuring cause thing is gone, right? Procuring cause used to be traditional procuring causes. Agent number 1 showed it, agent number 2 wrote it, which one gets paid? So you had to go to the Board of Realtors and do an arbitration. Now in that case, they both get paid because they each earn their commission. So the Board of Realtors isn't going to decide which one gets paid. The 2 agents are going to decide how much are we going to make the buyer. Are we going to make the buyer pay both, learn their lesson? Who knows? Anyway.
Okay, over here. What if you meet with the buyer, right? And he say, I do have an exclusive contract with another agent, but he's not showing me property.
Right, you're right, right.
He's not answering my call. How
Right.
can this buyer cancel?
Well, that's the same question he had.
In writing with that form?
Any,
or-
anytime, whether it's a listing or a buyer, if the agent is not doing their job,
Mhm.
that's a breach of contract. And you can just, there's no particular
Okay.
form, you can just terminate them.
But how? The buyer
Tell them,
just,
you're fired.
okay, he can text or.
Of course, they're gonna come back and say, you're wrong, I'm doing and they could
with-
fight you on it, but the point is, if you're in a contract with someone and they're not doing their job, you can cancel the contract. That's always been true.
But would it be better on a text, on an email? So how he.
In
needs to
writing
have
in
proof.
writing is always better, so they can't say, I don't remember this conversation. I mean, always.
Yeah, I
right?
know. So.
There's no
in a
form.
text- In a text, he can say, okay, I'm firing you because
Yes.
you're not doing your job.
Right.
So forget about the
Right.
exclusive thing. So
Right.
that'll be enough.
Unless they fight it and say, I think you're wrong. I don't think you have the right to fire me. I am doing my job, blah, blah. If you try to bite, I'm gonna sue you. Who knows?
Yeah.
That can always
There's
happen.
a lot of.
There's no.
Me has signed a contract.
Right,
They have free time. They stop by the builder's office.
right.
Well, then the builder will say, well, you didn't bring them in. So I'm not paying the referral.
Well, then you have your buyer broker contract. You can enforce
So
that.
I can go to the builder
Yeah.
and say, look, you know,
Well, the builder doesn't have to, in that scenario, her scenario is you have a buyer broker contract. Buyer, for some reason, and you have to educate your buyers.
right.
Buyer goes directly to the builder on a day off without even telling you. And they end up wanting to buy the house. Builder says, I don't have to pay her. And you're right. Builder doesn't have to pay you. The buyer has to pay you
Okay.
because they have
so
a
I
contract.
need to-
So that's why you have to educate your buyers. See, the big part of this new stuff is you educating your clients of things they used to be able to do without consequence, that if they do it now, there could be consequences. This is a whole new thing. The biggest part of your job is going to be explaining this to it's more work for you. In addition to all the other headaches about it, it's just more work. Yeah.
Okay, I have a father-son investment team anyway, but we made an offer under the son's name, got the offer accepted, that the BRBC, SPVB, I got the fee I wanted. They got the offer accepted. And we started escrow. The son now wants the father to take it because now he doesn't want it
Right.
under his name.
Yeah.
So I guess we're gonna have to have the escrow, the contract
Assign. You
assigned.
can assign it. Right.
What happens to my BRBC?
You still get paid. There's language in there makes it very clear that, and even if there wasn't language in there, it's very clear that it's the same. I mean, it's the same deal. You know, they got it through the family, but there is language in the contract that makes you're totally covered by that. You don't need an amendment. You need just an assignment in the purchase contract. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
So let's say you're the listing agent, right?
Yeah.
And a buyer comes to you and says, I want to buy this house.
Right.
Do you have to have a buyer broker agreement with that buyer as well as a listing agent?
Remember what I said before? There's two possibilities. One is buyer comes to you, they don't have an agent, and you convince them, then hire me.
Okay.
I'll do both. But of course, that means they have to sign a contract with you. So now you have your seller with a listing contract and your buyer with a buyer broker contract. Of course, your buyer is probably going to ask you, do you think the seller will pay this amount do you think your other client will pay the amount that I just agreed to pay you? And you're going to say, write an offer. You can't tell them. This is not an unrepresented buyer. But wait a second. I just told you there's two possibilities. One possibility is you convince this person to work with you as a buyer, in which case you get them to sign a buyer broker contract. And then you're covered. You have a listing contract where they agree to pay you, seller agrees to pay you this for your services. You have a buyer contract where the buyer agreed to pay you. It's a different situation if the buyer says, no, I don't want you to help me. I don't need any agent at all. Then once again, you and your seller could decide, we're not even going to deal with you. Or you could decide to deal with them, in which case, maybe you anticipated this at the time you took the listing and you filled in that new blank that says, if the deal has an unrepresented buyer, how much extra do I get?
You don't need the buyer broker, right?
No, no. Because this is a hard thing for everyone to grasp. Your seller is giving you permission to give this buyer the paperwork because that's for the benefit of the seller. You're going to give this unrepresented buyer a form called the BNA, Buyer Non-Agency. You're not going to help them write the offer, but you're probably going to have to give them all the other forms because that is in your seller's interest. Sign them as what? You're not signing them. Yeah. And people say, agents don't say, I don't like this because my name is on the bottom of the form on zip form, and that's going to imply that I'm their agent. What? Print it out and white it out, or simply we stand behind the BNA form. When people sign that form acknowledging you are not my agent, and then they try to come back later and say, well, I really thought she was my agent and she didn't do her job. This form holds up. We will stand behind this form. No, you can't say that because you agreed in writing that they were not your agent.
I just have a question. What about what people is working with the team? You know, they come, one agent shows the property or is working and then
Yeah.
they have a different
So
person that comes.
what's your question?
Well, the question is, do we sign under the team's name? Would that be the case?
It doesn't matter. The broker wants you to sign contracts. I mean, all that matters legally is an agent in the brokerage signed the contract. That means the entire brokerage is representing that client. As to who gets paid, that's up to the broker and the team agreement. That's an internal thing for you guys to figure out. Legally, what I'm saying today, all you got to put on the contract is the name of one agent.
And one extra, I do a lot of open houses and I've seen a lot of assistants come and show the property with that, you know, buyers coming with an assistant instead of the broker. What's the situation in
You're
that
saying
case?
the person at the open house is the assistant?
The one
person hosting the open
no,
house?
I'm hosting open houses and I have people coming with other agents, assistants, and
So the buyer is coming in to the open house with their agent's assistant.
Yes. Are they allowed to do that?
Well, look at it this way. I mean,
Not
licensed or
licensed.
not,
None.
there are various possibilities. A buyer shows up with their agent. A buyer shows up without an agent. Buyer shows up with their agent's assistant. You, as the host of the open house, don't care. Whoever the buyer has with them or doesn't have with them, do what I said. Make them sign the open house sign-in sheet, and if they won't sign it, don't help them. If they have their own agent, they probably don't need your help because their agent can help them. If they have their agent's assistant, that assistant who doesn't have a license can't help them any more than their brother-in-law can help them. I know people bring their whole family to the open house. They don't all need to sign this form. Just get one of them to sign the form. I mean, this is a common thing. Just for your own protection, that's what I'm saying is, I know some of this open house can be chaotic. There's so many people. I feel for you. Maybe you're not going to be able to keep on top of all this, in which case, don't show anybody. Just answer general questions that are on the flyer, but don't do a showing. Walk around with people and point out, but don't answer questions. You got to be careful about answering questions because there are going to be people trying to catch you. I'm telling you.
I can't. Are you allowed to do an amendment to the BRBC from a broker standpoint? Like if your commission changes, would you expect the agents to draft a whole new contract?
No.
Or just doing it?
Good form. We have a great, if you want to amend the buyer broker contract, we have a form, MTBR. We got a form for everything. Modification of terms, buyer representation agreement. By the way, here's a possibility is you sign up a buyer for X amount. You sign a buyer for X amount, and before you even start showing houses, you realize that wasn't enough. What was I thinking? Yes, you can definitely go back to the buyer and say, we need to amend this to give me more. Buyer says no, then fine, you deal with that. But you can amend the buyer broker contract up or down. We have a form, MTBR. All I was saying is if you're already writing an offer and the seller counters in a particular way, or at that point, I would not amend the buyer broker contract to give you more money. But before you've got to that point, it's okay. Did you have something? Everyone's pointing at each other. It's like semaphore.
Right.
Yes.
Hi, is the buyer's agent required to give the listing agent before the showing the BRBC?
Another great question. Okay. The form says, if I'm asking which I think is going to be very normal, if you're asking the seller to pay the buyer's agent's commission that your buyer has agreed to pay you, you definitely have to give the seller, not necessarily the whole form, but you give them page 3 of the form, which shows the compensation. You don't have to give them the whole form, but you have to just, in other words, the seller's saying, you're asking me to pay the commission you owe your agent, or you're asking me to pay this dollar amount. I just want to make sure you're not asking me to pay more than you already agreed to pay. In other words, if your buyer is only going to pay you 2, don't ask me to pay 3. And you could just take their word for it. You could say, but to be safe, trust but verify. Let me see your buyer broker contract where I can see that the buyer's actually committing to pay you the same amount, that you're offering to pay me. Otherwise, if the buyer is not asking the seller to pay, no, you don't need to get a copy of their BRBC just to make sure they have one. Maybe you're asking me, does a listing agent have any responsibility to police this and make sure that you can't show? No, it's not your job, but you're probably going to want it anyway, because they're probably going to be asking the seller to pay. In that case, I want to see it. So the quick answer is that probably every deal that's going to be the case. Yeah.
Okay, so last question on open house. If I have another agent within my brokerage
Yeah.
sitting in open
Yeah.
house and they do it incorrectly and they get busted because someone was checking on them, whatever, what is my liability?
It's the brokerage liability,
Okay,
unless you're the broker.
no.
Yeah. No, it's not. No, in other words, her question is, there's an agent at an open house. It's the listing agent, but they somehow do it wrong. Like they show someone around without getting them to sign that form. Who's in trouble? Probably, well, the broker's always in trouble. But maybe that agent might be in trouble too, but you're not in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's a big,
No, you don't have to worry about, when you're doing an open house, you don't have to worry about your friend in the office screwing up. That's not your problem. It's your broker's problem. Go ahead. I'm running out of time here, guys, so we got to make this quick.
Hello?
In fact, we're out of time. Let's do him, and him.
In the SPBB.
Yes, which is thankfully going away, but go ahead.
Yeah. It seems with these new forms, the irrevocable assignment.
Yeah.
Payment of whatever commissions agreed to.
Right.
That language doesn't seem to appear anywhere unless I'm.
But it's on the buyer broker contract itself, which, in other words, okay.
It's not in the agreement you make with the seller.
So in other words,
It doesn't appear to me.
I think what you're saying is buyer asks seller to pay on the SPBB.
Right.
Seller agrees. And
Used to be in the.
we get ready to close and seller for some reason says, I won't pay, right? That's the scenario.
That language which used to be in the contract.
Yeah.
Is no longer there, where that seller is agreeing irrevocably to assign the compensation and pay it through escrow. It seems that language.
Well, there is a clause in the buyer broker contract which says the buyer can assign to their agent the right to enforce this against the seller. But you're right. You're right. I think I know what you're saying is, I mean, but let's take it a step further. Buyer agrees to pay you X. So you ask the seller to pay, seller signs SPBV. Yes, I will pay. Seller won't pay. I mean, how is that going to work out? Is the seller going to say at close, they're going to instruct the escrow company not to pay? In which case the buyer's agent can say, well, I got a contract here. Well, then someone's got to pay me, or this buyer, then you got to pay me. Right? I mean, how's it going to work that the seller's not going to refuse to do what they agreed to do? How is that going to work? Are they going to tell the escrow company, I changed what I said on the SPB? I'm telling you as the escrow company, don't pay the buyer's agent. Is that what you're thinking?
I'm thinking you're not as protected. In the old contracts, there was this irrevocable assignment and instruction to escrow. So escrow had to do it.
But that's in the listing contract and it's in the buyer broker contract.
Yes, but it's not in the agreement that buyer makes with the seller anymore.
Yeah,
It
which
seems
is
like it
why
needs to be
you and I are
added
going to
in
be
somewhere.
happy that the SPBB goes away and it gets incorporated into the purchase contract. So that's going to happen, but unfortunately not tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, so if the BRBC form says you can only get paid 2%
Right.
max, and then seller's offering 3%, that 1% goes to the closing cost of the buyer, or it could be navigated that way, or?
Yeah, you just you can't even ask for it. I mean, it goes back to the seller. I mean, in other words,
okay.
yeah. I mean, the point is it's wrong to even ask for that, but you should do it. All right, I think I got one more question.
Doing an open house and you have a buyer walk in that says he has an agent and he signed a contract, do you still have him sign the OH&A?
Yeah, if they want you to help. I mean, first of all, if they're walking into an open house with their agent, they don't need you. If they walk in and say, I have an agent, but that lazy bum isn't with me today, you still don't help them. I mean, they're the same as a buyer who doesn't have an agent. You don't want to be accused of providing agent services to this person without a contract. So you can't really show them whether they have an agent. They tell you they have an agent, and they don't tell you they have an agent. The agent's not there. There are all these possibilities. Now, the good news for you, by the way, is I'm coming back in a month, or it's on the schedule. I got a funny feeling we're still going to be talking about this stuff. We're doing still twice a week. We're doing free town halls. We're doing one. It's happening right now. You just missed it, but we're doing 2 more next week. We have recorded on our website a free class just on the buyer broker contract, free class just on the seller side, free class just town halls like this that have been recorded. We have FAQs on our website. We're there for you. Call the hotline. I said the hotline's never been busier, but we get to everybody. But instead of waiting 2 minutes, you might wait 20 minutes. Or instead of getting a call back in 3 hours, it may take a day or two. All these questions that I didn't answer, you can just keep asking. We're going to get to them. I would stay, but they're waiting for me in Tehachapi. Goodbye.
There's hand for Gov.